Good afternoon. There's only two of us, so I think I'm going to take a seat over here. So, as you just heard, my name is Andromeda, but pretty much everybody calls me Andy, and I'm from one of the session sponsors today, so that's Workiva. You can find our booth out the back. That's my duty done on that front. So what we're planning to do for the next 20 minutes or so is sort of have a bit of a discussion about what companies can do and how they can operate within the ESG reporting space. In particular, we'll focus a little bit on benchmarks, but we're also aiming to have a relatively practical conversation. With me is Paul Druckmann. Now, Paul, you've been involved in corporate reporting for decades now, and on wider transparency. So maybe a little bit about how you got involved in that, but also, is there a path sort of in all that time period that explains how we've got to where we are today?
Sure, thank you, Andy. You have to forgive me, I've got a bit of a cough, so I'm sucking a cough sweet, so apologies. Well, thank you very much, and it's great to be here this afternoon. It's quite poignant, actually, because one of the key reasons that I got so involved was because of King Charles, because back in the early 2000s, he and I helped him form something called Accounting for Sustainability, which was one of his charities. So I haven't quite used to the change. It was mainly geared at the accounting profession and accountants in business, but nonetheless, it was what we started to look at was reporting, because we felt that reporting was the way that we could influence behavior of corporates and also try to get trust into the system from the ordinary stakeholders. So we're talking here originally about 2004 in those days, and it was quite a well-funded project that the Prince set up. And one of the themes that we looked at in those days was what we called connected reporting. And we were looking, especially in the King's eyes, we were looking at the environmental aspects on its own, and we tried to connect environmental issues into the financial reporting regime through the noughties, as we can call them. Now, there were some players around at that time, including the Global Reporting Initiative and various others, and they, frankly, and I don't have to answer to anybody these days, frankly, they didn't like a new group coming in challenging some of the things that were being talked about. But at the end of the decade, the Prince convened a group of the great and good from around the world. So from the chairs of FASB and IASB, the chairman of the World Bank, the chairman of IOSCO, or the chairman of some of the biggest companies in the world. And he convened them in a round table, and out of that grew integrated reporting and the IRC. And in fact, if you look today at an annual report for a UK-listed company, the strategic report is the sort of UK implementation of integrated reporting, which happened across the world. To me, it's interesting that the idea of where we are today with the new International Sustainability Standards Board being created under the IFRS Foundation, which I'm sure you've heard about. And I apologize about the jargon. If there's jargon like, I just roll off IFRS Foundation, and some of you may think he's just being clever. I used to be in the world of technology, and we used to actually on purpose use jargon so people would pay more because they thought we knew more. But in this case, it's just you fall into the trap. But nonetheless, the work that's going on, we're going to have mandatory sustainability reporting. And the EU work, the EU Sustainability Reporting Directive is going to also be mandatory sustainability reporting. And that's something that we've all been wishing for. That's the path we wanted to go. But when we created the integrated reporting, what's it now, it was 2011 it started, so 2010. We also brought together all of the sustainability reporting organizations like GRI, and SASB was just being formed in the US, and CDP with the Carbon Disclosure Project, etc., under something called a corporate reporting dialogue. And I called it dialogue because it was the first time there was multilateral discussions as against one-to-one. But nothing happened for 10 years. Yeah, and a lot of it is because people believe so much in their own work that there was a lack of compromise that was around. And it's taken only the last 2 or 3 years where that breakthrough has come, where everybody's starting to get behind where it's going. And we still have this problem that I could hear was talked about in the last session and in sessions before, where, who is your audience? Is it the capital markets and investors, or is it them and wider society? And the ISSB are going down one route, and the European Union are going down another route. I do think we're getting there.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot recently, and I think despite all the criticism, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that what's happening now has happened in an amazingly short period of time when you compare it to everything you've just been through and the time it took us to kind of get to this place.
Yeah, we sat 20 years getting, I wouldn't say nowhere, but not getting to the mandatory element. And then in the last, certainly 2.5 years, it's just happened.
Yeah, and we're getting that consolidation. I think one of the things we're talking about here is this is the journey of reporting, and reporting is all about transparency, whether it's to those capital market stakeholders or it's to the wider stakeholder audience. I mean, we're still talking about transparency, getting data out there. Would you say that is fundamental towards also attaining trust, or is there anything else that's in that trust picture that can help companies sort of get to that place?
Well, I think it's, I don't know if people have heard of the Edelman Trust Barometer. So this is a large media organization called Edelman. And over more than 20 years now, they bring out their Trust Barometer for Davos, for the big conference every January. And last year, for the first time, the only entities that were felt to be trustworthy was business. Right, so governments, media, you name other types of entities, were in the distrust area as against the trust area, which puts a real emphasis on business to be truly transparent and to try to deliver trust, because both the informed and the uninformed population that they use in the Trust Barometer are saying that it's only business that can actually achieve that. And it's quite interesting, I just got a couple of statistics off of that, whereby 80% of that, thousands of people that they survey, 80% will invest, if they had to invest personally, based on beliefs and values. And 58% will buy and advocate for brands that follow their belief and values. If you go 10 years back in that barometer, business was way down, and there were other areas, other types of organizations that were felt to be the ones that could carry the can. Governments, their distrust is extraordinarily low, governments and regulators. But it is all about trust. And if you look at what we do at the World Benchmarking Alliance, we are measuring the most impactful 2,000 companies, organizations in the world, and their impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah. So that's trying to go back to trust from people, not so much from the investor community, but from the ordinary people that they're serving. And in fact, just a couple of statistics from that. The oil and gas benchmark, which I looked up, only 30 companies, 30 out of the 100 companies, actually disclose their capital expenditure on lower carbon, mitigating carbon. The initiatives they're taking on that.
Do you think that's because they can't disclose it, or do you think that's for some other reason?
I think there's two reasons. I think one, I actually think they can, or they could.
They could disclose it.
They could. They may not have the figure to hand, but it wouldn't be a big deal for them. But the other thing is I don't think they know that people want it, if you know what I mean. And it's part of a transparency regime that I think there's far too much focus, and I'm not talking about sustainability reports. I'm talking about, the core transparency that they have to all. That they're not realizing that actually, even if they're at investor meetings and the AGM, they're not being asked. Yeah. Actually, it's the right thing to do, is to be transparent. Yeah. And it will, because as soon as the data is out there and it starts to be compared, at the World Benchmarking Alliance, we are effectively ranking and comparing, and companies want to know why they're not higher. And normally it's because they're not transparent, not because they're bad, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it's because the data is not available, and it's hard to trust without that data being out there in public, and therefore when you benchmark them, you have to go with what's available.
But also part of that is something we'll come back to, I'm sure, Andy, is the fact that even though they can get to the data, that a lot of it is worrying at whether that data is accurate, well-controlled, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of an issue. I think something that I've got here is old phrases sort of coming back into the mainstream and talking about companies behaving well, what that actually means, and things like license to operate. Is that sort of, in this broader sort of stakeholder context, is that coming in now into the mainstream or back into the mainstream?
Yeah, I think before it was something that people like me talked about and tried to encourage. I mean, I was just listening to the gentleman sitting in your seat just before, who was talking about their license to operate. May not have used that term, but I think we are moving quite rapidly into a world where companies want to demonstrate their license to operate, because if they don't, they're seeing a changing world, and they're seeing like the lack of talent. People are choosing companies for particular reasons. And if you say something, you say to a new recruit, a bright new recruit, oh, we believe in all of that, they'll want to say, well, show me. And I think that's a key part.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about this need for transparency being about more than just the capital markets. So specifically about the impact on, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals and benchmarking against those goals. At the moment, I think, organizations like your organization are producing these benchmarking reports, and we see lots of other agencies producing benchmarking reports. But how do we know which are the good benchmarks, as it were, and who should be owning benchmarks, and where does all that sit in this landscape?
Of course, the best are ours.
Obviously.
They would be. How do we know? I think, actually, most of the benchmarks and things that are out there are for an audience, a specific audience. And the ones that are well known are for investors. Yeah. And I think we've got to get away from that in the corporate world, where investors is one of the audiences. And there's a lot of black boxes out there, where here we will produce this index or this benchmark, but it's our property and it's our IP. That has to stop. Yeah, it has to be so that people can actually judge whether it's credible, rather than it just being a product that's being sold, because it's too important.
Yeah, and I think, for me, this is sort of one of those areas. If the benchmark in the report, obviously we need credible benchmarks, we need to trust those, but the company that needs to produce the data that go towards that data also has to be trusted. So that that transparent information itself can then be trusted by the audience. And we've talked a little bit about that so far. I mean, what kind of things can companies actually do to help with this trust and this transparency, and making when those benchmark reports come out, making it so that they do go up those rankings a little bit, and that information, they understand which information it is that needs to be out there in order to help with that.
Well, I think again, if you look over the last 5 years, especially. Actually trying to understand who their stakeholders are, looking at stakeholder maps. In fact, I know it's not really a corporate, but ACCA, the accounting body, they do a fantastic stakeholder map, okay? Because it's unusual, because there's the members of their key stakeholders, but there's all sorts of others. And you will see in good integrated reporting, in good corporate reporting, you will see that there is an evident outreach by the corporates to find out what it is their stakeholders think are important. So I wouldn't underestimate how far corporates are going at the moment and trying. The problem is firstly they have to demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the hardest bit is that the amount of data they want is going to go up. It's not going to flatten off. It's going to go up and up and up. And if they don't like it, get out of business, is what I would say. Because that is what's happening. But the other part of it, in terms of having good data, and as a chartered accountant, I'm hating, please don't ever quote me on this, get rid of the spreadsheet. Yeah, I wonder how many of the corporates that are in this hall are still relying on spreadsheets as their core, very sophisticated, brilliant spreadsheets. But nonetheless, it's a dead duck. It has to stop. And so we need. I see the systems that are out there. With Workiva's and one of them. There is technology. You actually raised something quite interesting when we were just chatting before. Is I chaired a project for the FRC on the future of corporate reporting a couple of years ago. Actually, it's more now, about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And we did a fantastic chapter on technology and its place in the reporting and the relationship, the key relationships for ESG. And the regulator, they never published that chapter. I think it was a bit too radical. But we need to start using the innovation that we have in technology to really get out there and understand our stakeholders and then deliver on it. Reporting is still pushing. This is what you want, we'll give it to you. Whereas actually what we should be doing is saying, this is what we've been asked for. Here it is. What is it that you want to know? And go and pull it yourself.
I think the sort of slight difference for me is I have a really, really broad view of data. So yes, I'm not a big fan of spreadsheets either. They definitely have their uses, but as standalone tools, they have a lot of risk inherent in them. I'd also love to get rid of the idea that narrative is not important, that narrative is not something that companies need to worry about, because I think it forms a really important part of the trust picture, and that it's also data. It's still relatively nascent, but there are organizations who will trawl through the narrative and they will look for keywords and they will do sentiment analysis. And they will run through that on a programmatic basis.
No, you're absolutely right to correct me there. And then, of course, with integrated reporting, it's all about narrative.
Yeah.
But I think where we failed over the last 10 years is to properly back up that narrative. I used to use the expression that when I was involved with the integrated reporting, I used to be able to read an integrated report, might be from Japan or from Singapore or wherever it might be, and I would instantly know it was lipstick on a pig. It was this looks fantastic, but as soon as you take off the lipstick, it's not very good at all.
That's a really good segue into our top question on the Slido at the moment. And it says, I'm paraphrasing a little, what role in the high level of trust towards business do we think their marketing teams play, which is obviously something that government and organizations don't necessarily have quite such a spend on?
Well, I would like to say that marketing doesn't matter. And of course, marketing shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. But we live in an age where, actually it has been for decades, but even more so, we live in an age where marketing really does matter. But I think, and that takes us back to data and trust. You have to have verifiable, meaty data. This is the accountant come out on me anyway. But unless we do that, we're never going to get to a point where the organizations are producing what the stakeholders want, and therefore they start to actually create a relationship that is very strong at all sorts of levels. Yeah. So that's how I would respond to that.
Yeah. I think as well, for me, there's an idea that the marketing by its very nature is not trustworthy. But I think, we work with communication teams as well. The communication teams also would like to work with trustworthy, reliable narrative and have, the correct revenue figure in their materials as well. And I think one of the things about sustainability is it's so broad. We're talking all about having trust within just this ESG space, but we also need to rely on the figures from finance, and we also need to work with the communication teams and so on. So I think it works really broadly across the operations in an organization.
And, if you're presenting to a board, and you don't actually have coordinated and, from narrative to data at one point and another point and another point, and you can't rely on that all being the same, as a board member, I would be horrified.
Yeah. I think we're going to stop at the board's a really good place to stop anyway, because we are now officially over time by 44 seconds. So thank you very much to the audience. And if you've got any questions, come and find us later in at the Workiva booth.
Thank you.